So if we were operating on the basis of saying to people, look, you should only be on these drugs if you get an effect at a 5 milligram dose that you figure suits you. Okay. Um, we shouldn't be giving you a huge dose in order to try and knock you out almost, you know.
What's a
Um,
normal
that,
starting dose that would get prescribed to someone?
well, uh, at a normal dose of Prozac, which was the only dose you could get for years and years, was the 20 milligram
I
dose.
see. So it
You
started that
couldn't
way
get
because they
a
designed the
five
trials that
milligram.
way because they wanted to maximize the probability of seeing an effect in people with mild depression because the whole thing was being engineered to try and get the outcome they wanted.
Yes.
And so
Now,
initially everything was done on 20 milligrams. And so
yes.
that was the only game in town, even though we later figured out that five was
Well, it's
just as
not
a
later. It isn't later.
oh
They did trials on the 5 milligram dose before it was marketed and had just as good a result. But in terms of what they were going to show FDA, they figured we're not going to take any chances with a 5 milligram dose. We're going to just go with
wow.
at the 20 milligram dose. And also, part of the marketing afterwards was, well, let's make it simple for doctors. Just one dose,
One dose,
one
20 for everyone.
pill, one dose. That's all you do.
Right,
You
because
know,
that's
it
probably going to be most conducive to um, using it as widely as
doctors
possible.
being willing to use it. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So this brings us to another issue I wanted to ask you about. So Eli Lilly had data on the 5 milligrams and the 20 milligrams, but they didn't have to show all of it to FDA. How does that piece of all of this work in terms of pharmaceutical companies do these trials, they do this research, but they don't have to show or share all the data even with the FDA?
Yeah, well, you need to ask yourself, what do FDA do? And FDA are a bunch of bureaucrats. They're a bit like the Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA, who get the paperwork from Boeing about the latest plane, and they're just looking at the paperwork. They're not flying the airplane. They're not involved in the design of the airplane. They're just trying to tick boxes, have Boeing done the kinds of things that they ought to be doing. And the FAA are only interested in a useful paper trail.
Yeah. Have you
What
fulfilled the requirements of the protocol?
of the protocol? Sure. In terms of keeping people safe afterwards on this plane, FAA have nothing to do with it. It's the pilot who, as I say, uh, if things go wrong with this plane or with the system of all the planes going in and out of airports and things like that, and the pilot gets worried, he or she will say, well, look, until this is fixed, I'm not going to fly again. And all of her colleagues are going to say the same thing. You must fix this or we ain't going to fly again. Doctors don't do that. In theory, they're in the same position as pilots, which is they're the people who are going to keep you safe. This drug has gone, I mean, there's a bunch of paperwork that has gone into FDA. FDA have ticked boxes. They haven't got in touch with the patients recruited to the trial. They don't even know if all the patients in the trial supposedly exist. They certainly don't know that they've got all the trials that the company did. They don't look at the healthy volunteer trials, which are, the ones that are really going to show what the drug does. If we have a trial where we give this drug to people who are anxious or people who are depressed, yeah, there can be a bit of confusion if people become suicidal. Well, depression can cause that as well. But if you give these drugs to healthy volunteers and they become suicidal and commit suicide, which they have done,
Right.
it's difficult to blame the illness.
Right.
Okay, but FDA don't look at these healthy
Right.
volunteer
I
trials.
mean,
They read some paperwork and tick a bunch of boxes. Uh,
I mean,
and
it sounds like what you're saying is that the FDA they do their job in the sense of the paperwork is submitted to them by drug companies and they will read the paperwork, they will look at the paperwork, they will make sure it's filled out properly, but there's no sort of extra or further investigation of whether or not the paperwork is tied to reality, if it's actually what it says it is. There's not a lot of looking under the hood beyond what's submitted.
yeah, it's very much a case of FDA are there to license the use of certain words.
Hmm.
It's the Food and Drugs Agency. So one company can bring them some brand stuff which they want to call chocolate.
Yeah.
And FDA have a criterion for chocolate, which is it's got to have so much cocoa kind of
Wow.
solids in it.
I've never
If
quite
you've
thought of it
got
this
that,
way. It's an agency
if
that is regulating the use of language.
yeah, if you've got the right amount of cocoa solids, you can use the word chocolate. But FDA aren't in the business of saying this is good chocolate. Okay. The company that wants to market this as chocolate are the ones that are going to go out there and try and persuade you that our chocolate's much better than any other chocolate you can get. Okay. It's the same with butter. You know, they've FDA have got a slab of yellow stuff. Is it butter? Well, it depends on the animal fat content, whether we're going to let you use the word butter or not. But FDA aren't going to tell you if it's healthy or not to take
Right.
butter. It's doctors who are going to maybe work at this, you know. It's a bit the same with, well, it is the same with all of the antidepressants and every other group of drugs.